shall be engraved on thy very soul. Lazard Valak!
Lazard, think this through, please!
It isn't uncommon to see video game protagonists as the underdog, as it allows for said character to not only be relatable, but it also opens up the potential for character growth. A good example of this would be Alicia's story up to this point. Throughout the game, she has played the role of an underdog, and has faced many tough adversaries on her way to stop Odin's tyranny. However, it is not by Alicia's hand that Odin's reign is brought to an end. During the 4th chapter of Valkyrie profile, one of Lenneth's spiritual concentrations leads her to Flensburg, where she will recruit a mage named Lorenta into the party. This is a critical point in the game's story that cannot be skipped over if players wish to complete the A ending. It is here where players first encounter a mage named Lazard Valak. Now, considering the fact that Valkyrie profile takes place many years after the events of the 2nd game, people may be confused as to how Lazard Valak exists in this world, but all shall be explained in due time. For now, I wish to cover the events of Lazard's past, leading up to the events of Valkyrie Profile 2's final chapter. In the first Valkyrie profile, Lazard is best described as being the ultimate underdog with a trick up his sleeve. At first glance, he seems like a delusional madman whose threatening presence poses no threat to a goddess like Lenneth Valkyrie. As a human, Lazard's power is no match for Lenneth's, much like all the other foes she has faced in previous chapters. What makes Lazard stand out from the rest, however, is that he is fully aware of this fact, and thus he presents the first major obstacle in Lenneth's path. Lazard's depiction in the first Valkyrie profile is a far cry from the cool-headed mage that he is in the 2nd game. Instead, he is portrayed as a despicable madman with a crude and twisted sense of humour, as is shown by his interaction with the captured elf, twisting her words into an implication of sexual desire between her and Lazard's homunculus, bringing further upset to the helpless elf. Not only does this scene give players a taste of Lazard's disturbing characteristics and his psychological prowess, but it also puts Lazard into a position of power right from the get-go, a position that players would be quick to assume to be short-lived. This assumption is immediately crushed when Lazard lures his former teacher, Lorenta, to his tower, where she would suffer tremendous torment, only to face a bitter end. I simply adore this scene, as it shows just how calculated and intelligent Lazard truly is, while further showcasing his twisted nature. Despite his deep understanding of how to manipulate the emotions of his victims, it isn't directly stated whether or not Lazard truly revels in the suffering of others. While it is heavily implied that he does, his actions actually serve a more practical purpose than one might initially believe. Lazard knew that it wouldn't be enough to simply kill Lorenta or her husband. He had to make sure that his actions brought him enough infamy in order for him to become closer to his prize. As an underdog, Lazard first had to prove his worthiness as a villain. Therefore, Lazard does what he does best, in order to attract the attention of the one whom he desires most. A trick to lure the unsuspecting heroine into his clutches. This was never about Lorenta, nor was it about torturing elves. All of these horrific acts were merely a means to an end. Lazard beckons Lenneth into his foreboding tower, where the two would finally meet each other face to face. It is at this point where Lazard reveals his plans to Lenneth, all while expressing his adoration for her. This is the first foe who shows a deep interest in Lenneth, not as a goddess, but as a person. Lazard clearly knows a lot about Lenneth, and despite beating him in a fight, Lazard manages to get away, leaving her with a single provocative line in retaliation, showing that despite being defeated in a fight, Lazard ultimately got one up on her by showing her that he knows more about her than she knows herself. Lazard has essentially exploited Lenneth's ultimate weakness, something she has to contend with throughout the game. In addition, this shows just how confident Lazard is in the face of such a formidable adversary, because according to the famous quote of Sun Tzu, those who know their enemy and know themselves need not fear 100 battles, whereas those that do not know themselves or their enemy will succumb in every battle. Lazard is essentially the ultimate foil to Lenneth, and thus he is essentially her greatest rival. Therefore, despite his mortality, he has proven himself to be more powerful than Lenneth could possibly believe, and as is typical of a goddess who is known to bring evil to its knees, even she refuses to accept that a mere human could be such a threat to her, but little does she realise how far he is willing to go to achieve his ultimate dream. Later on, a character named Mystina, an acquaintance of Lazard, is introduced. It is heavily implied that Mystina shows an interest in Lazard, and she decides to use astral projection to explore his tower with the intent of stalking him. What Mystina finds inside the tower not only blows her mind, but she is disgusted to find a homunculus of what appears to be a very young girl, leading to her assumption that Lazard is a paedophile. Now, Lenneth is far from being an underage girl. I mean, she has existed for countless years after all, so it's obvious that Lazard clearly likes women of his own age, but it is possible that he may have expressed an interest in minors for research purposes, if you know what I mean. This clearly paints a picture of what type of character Lazard is. He is so sick and twisted that you wouldn't want to know his secrets even if he told you. This disgusts Mystina so much that her opinion of Lazard changes completely. However, Mystina still believes that Lazard can be of use to her, as she recognises his knowledge better than anyone, so she kidnaps the lifeless homunculus in order to blackmail Lazard, showing that despite not seeing any truly despicable acts from her, she and Lazard are both cut from the same cloth, creating an interesting relationship between the two. A relationship of mutual respect, yet distaste for one another. Both Lazard and Mystina recognise the need to rely on one another in order for them to reach their own agendas. Though it goes without saying that Lazard is always one step ahead of her the whole way, with the Philosopher's Stone's knowledge. Much like Lenneth, Mystina too is vulnerable to Lazard's superior intellect. Lazard takes great pleasure divulging the truths of the world to Mystina. After all, he is showcasing his knowledgeable prowess, which essentially allows him to stroke his own ego, going even as far to express his ultimate desire to her, leaving Mystina completely baffled at the idea of a man getting to take ownership of a goddess. But before she can react, Lazard casts a spell on the machine she is in, freezing her to death, and cackles madly to himself. Now for players who saw the B ending, this would be the last time they would see Lazard in the game, and if they didn't enter the Tower of Lazard Beleth in Chapter 4, or exited it for whatever reason, the Mystina recruitment scene wouldn't have been available either, nor would Mystina be recruitable. This means that in order to view the rest of Lazard's backstory, you will need to make sure to get the A ending. The A ending is filled to the brim with story, which is a harsh contrast to the game at large. What makes the A ending so interesting, however, is not Lenneth's characterization that is brought about by the final scenes, rather Lazard's sudden appearance that shockingly has him working together with Arngrim and his former victim, Mystina, in order to restore Lenneth's body after it was taken by Hurst. This leads to several events, once again showcasing Lazard's crude sense of humour while also showcasing his knowledge. It is these traits that ultimately makes Lazard stand out from the other villains in the series. In a way, it kind of makes him somewhat of a lovable rogue. Not only is he very much an underdog throughout the entire game, being a mere mortal and all, but he has the charisma in both Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2 that makes him so compelling, to the point that if you ask any Valkyrie Profile fan who their favourite character is, there's a good chance that many would say Lazard. In fact, I would personally consider Lazard to be my all-time favourite character in gaming, and I'm hoping that this analysis of his character can help you understand why he is my favourite. There are many insane characters in games such as Albedo from Xenosaga, Kefka from Final Fantasy VI, and Mugetsu from The Bouncer, but none of them can even remotely compare to the greatness of Lazard Beleth. Upon finishing the first Valkyrie profile, right after the world is destroyed and brought back to life under Lenneth's control, the end credits roll, and a screen saying Finn shows up, making you think that the game is over, and it's time to turn the game off. Those who leave the screen on long enough will be treated to a scene with Brahms. This scene is particularly interesting to me as it suggests that Brahms has ulterior motives, which could open up the possibility of a sequel perhaps. Who knows? What's really important is that right after this, Lazard shows up. Now you would assume that Lazard came back under Lenneth's control, as she is the creator, but you'd be wrong. While it was thought that the Dragon Orb killed every single being on Midgard, only 3 survived: Brahms, Silmeria, and Lazard. How Brahms and Silmeria survived is unknown, but Lazard's cause of survival was the Philosopher's Stone. By destroying it, he was able to protect himself from Loki's Dragon Orb, allowing him to survive the Armageddon that everyone else was crushed by. With his memories still intact, and without Lenneth's hold over him, Lazard is free to do whatever he pleases. But as horrifying as that may seem, he is still a mortal human. Surely he can't subjugate a powerful goddess like Lenneth, especially now that she has the power of creation in her hands. What could he possibly do to accomplish his dreams?
Lord Odin! The distortion I felt! It is him! Ah!
Freya! Wave my command! Upon the loom of fate, blood, flesh and bone for these souls entwined. Minion of their puppets anew! Soul transfusion. How can a mere mage wield the power of a god? This is no mere mage. Silmeria! Foolish god, blinded by the dragon orb's shine, your grip upon Gungnir fades. That which does not grow falls into decay. The hand worthy of wielding this divine lance is mine!
It is at this point that the primary antagonist of the entire series has been replaced with the true antagonist of the series. Finally, after all of the build-up from the first game, Lazard takes up the moniker of main antagonist, by killing the previous main antagonist, no less. I love this, as not only has Lazard's entire backstory built up specifically for this moment, but it just goes to show how meaningless this entire fight was, as you have merely replaced one evil for another. Thus, a whole new arc of the story begins, and immediately after, the situation is bleak with Alicia losing not only her ring, but also Rufus thanks to Lazard's soul transfusion spell, infusing Odin's soul into Rufus's body before his death. Luckily for Rufus, he is able to communicate with Alicia as a soul, though he requires materialization to become alive again. So from this point on, Alicia is on her own. Much like Arthas was when he was separated in Asjolnarund, Alicia now has to brave the perils of Yggdrasil by herself as she tracks down the ring used to sustain her life back on Midgard so that she can use it to materialise Rufus. Upon doing so, the game presents a brief moment of triumph as a new song plays in Yggdrasil titled Start Up from Prolonged Darkness, which is full of energy and pumps players up for the second arc of the story so that they can finally vanquish the treacherous Lazard once and for all.